Good evening, and welcome to the 12th Annual Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame Induction Ceremony. I'm Jennifer Maddox, the Executive Director of the Carnegie Center. While Kentucky Poet Laureate, the late James Baker Hall, a 2014 inductee into the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame, wrote about an experience he had with a New York literary agent who asked, "How come there are so many good writers working now in Kentucky? Isn't this a subject for investigation?" Now, at the Carnegie Center, we have long recognized the talent that we have right here in our state. Under the leadership of retired Executive Director Neil Chetnick, we founded the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame in 2012 to honor Kentucky writers whose work reflects the character and culture of the Commonwealth, but also to educate Kentuckians about our state's rich literary heritage. Many Kentuckians may not be aware that the person standing in front of them in line at the grocery store might be a National Book Award winner, or that a New York Times best-selling author might be walking her dogs in the park. Great writers are all around us, but we've also found that there are many deceased writers who were not always recognized for their achievements. Inducting writers into the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame and sharing the Kentucky Literature Year in Review helps us celebrate the accomplishments of our state's talented writers, past and present. As one of the founding committee members of the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame, I am honored to take on this new role tonight as we give out a Literary Impact Award and induct 6 writers into the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame. It's a night full of excitement, and we are so glad that you could join us. Tonight's sponsors are the Kentucky Arts Council, LexArts, Charles and Linda Gorton, Jim Gray, Community Trust Bank, Cornett, State Farm Agent Russ Tucker, LV Harkness, and Visit Lex. Our deepest thanks for your support. And now, I'd like to turn the mic over to another member of our Hall of Fame's founding committee, our friend, Mayor Linda Gorton.
Good evening, everyone. We have a great crowd here tonight, and everybody's happy. Welcome to our historic Kentucky Theater, now over 100 years old. And for those of you who are from around the Commonwealth, we welcome you to Lexington. This is one of my all-time favorite events. As well as Jennifer, I am a proud founding member of the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame Committee, and it is amazing how we can honor our talented Kentucky writers. We have a wealth of them. Here in the heart of the bluegrass, we cherish the art of writing and celebrate our authors. Fine writing is a Kentucky tradition. From U.S. Poet Laureates and Pulitzer Prize winners to the neighbors among us who write short stories and screenplays, Kentucky is filled with talent. Speaking of wonderful talent, I want to congratulate this year's Hall of Fame inductees, George C. Wolfe, Fenton Johnson, Marianne Taylor Hall, the late Mary Lee Settle, the late Paul Brett Johnson, and the late Billy C. Clark. In addition to our Hall of Fame inductees, the late Mike Mullins, who served as director of the Hindman Settlement School and made the Appalachian Writers Workshop a nationally known program that promoted the careers of many Kentucky writers, is recognized with the Kentucky Literary Impact Award. I want to thank the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning Executive Director Jennifer Maddox and her staff for their commitment to education and literacy, a commitment that continues to make Lexington a better place for all. And thanks to all of you for being with us tonight and coming to our wonderful Kentucky Theater to celebrate. Congratulations to this year's honorees and all who are part of the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame. Have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor Gordon. Good evening. I'm Tom Evelyn, the Carnegie Center's Literary Arts Liaison, and thank you all for being here. I would first like to recognize any previous Hall of Fame inductees with us tonight. If you would please stand. I've seen a few tonight. Got a couple on the stage. I would also like to welcome those who are watching live stream on Facebook, where the ceremony is being recorded for future viewing. I want to begin the evening by looking at some of the highlights of Kentucky's Year in Literature. The year began with the news that the Librarian of Congress had asked Lexington poet Ada Limon to be the first United States Poet Laureate to serve a second two-year term. Last month, Time magazine named Limon one of its 11 Women of the Year, and this coming October, one of her poems will blast off for Jupiter, engraved on the vault of NASA's Europa Clipper. Ada has been on the road a lot since she was named Poet Laureate in 2022, and she couldn't be with us tonight, but she did send a message.
Hello everyone, my name is Ada Limon, and I am the 24th Poet Laureate of the United States. I also live in Lexington, Kentucky, although I fear you wouldn't know that by how often I am on the road. But I am with you in spirit right now because I want to celebrate all of the amazing writers that are being welcomed into the Kentucky Great Writers Hall of Fame. What a wonderful celebration. And I want to give a special shout out to Lexington's new Youth Poet Laureate. What a gift you are to all of us. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful evening, and I really believe that language can help shift and change the world. So everyone that is in this endeavor to make language matter, my heart to your heart, thank you for everything you do.
We lost at least two notable Kentucky writers last year. Linwood Montel, longtime folklore professor at Western Kentucky University and the author of many books about Kentucky folklore, died December 21st at the age of 91. Terry Bisson, the great science fiction and fantasy author who was born in Madisonville and raised in Owensboro, died January 10th at the age of 81. On a happier note, Hall of Fame member Barbara Kingsolver shared the Pulitzer Prize in Fiction last year for Demon Copperhead, her epic novel about the opioid epidemic's impact on Appalachia. Jonathan Green, a poet, book designer, and publisher whose Gnomon Press published the early works of many famous Kentucky writers, celebrated his 80th birthday in May with his 40th collection of poetry, Going Through It, published by Broadstone Books in Frankfurt. Rebecca Gale Howe is the editor of What Things Cost, a major anthology of writing about American labor that includes essays from Crystal Wilkinson and Silas House. Governor Andy Beshear in April appointed Silas House to do a two-year term as Kentucky Poet Laureate. The Library of Congress chose House's award-winning 2022 novel Lark Ascending as the Kentucky selection for the National Book Festival in Washington. Then he was nominated for a Grammy Award for writing the video script for Tyler Childers' song In Your Love. He also launched a new podcast in partnership with the Carnegie Center, Writing Lessons with Silas House, where he interviews other Kentucky writers. And if that isn't enough, part of his work as State Poet Laureate, Silas has launched a series of writing workshops at Kentucky State Parks. Willie Carver's book, Gay Poems for Red States, attracted national attention, both because of its literary quality and his personal story. He was Kentucky's Teacher of the Year in 2022, then was forced from his job because he's gay. Lexington author David King's latest book, 6 Days in August, The Story of the Stockholm Syndrome, published by W.W. Norton, has been sold for a film by an Oscar-winning director. And one of his earlier books, The Trial of Adolf Hitler, which has been sold for a TV miniseries, has been recommended by CNN and other news media as a book for helping to understand some current events. Alex Harrow's novella, Amir Mended, was a runner-up for the Locust Science Fiction Foundation Awards. Hannah Pittard published her latest book, a sort of memoir titled We Are Too Many. M. Hendricks' novel, The Chaperone, came out to glowing reviews. In the same month, her husband, New York Times bestselling author David Bell, published his 16th novel, Try Not to Breathe. Stephen Bright, an internationally known human rights lawyer who has returned to his native central Kentucky, published The Fear of Too Much Justice, Race, Poverty, and the Persistence of Inequality in the Criminal Courts. Janet Holloway published her third book, a memoir fiction hybrid titled Ain't Nobody's Business If I Do. Kim Michelle Richardson's 2019 novel, The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek, passed the 1 million sales mark last year. Katerina Stoikova, whose Accents Publishing showcases the work of many Kentucky poets and authors, had a new poetry collection, Between a Birdcage and a Birdhouse, published by the University Press of Kentucky. Meanwhile, the University Press launched a new imprint, Screen Door Press, dedicated to discovering exceptional voices within the Black literary traditions. The imprint will be edited by award-winning writer Crystal Wilkinson, who had a big year. Wilkinson's latest book, Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghost, a culinary memoir, has become a national sensation. The New York Public Library recently chose it as a book of the day. She's been featured in national media, including CBS TV, which recently filmed at the Carnegie Center, and the New York Times. And earlier this month, Crown bought her next book, also a memoir, to be called Heartsick, on Motherhood and Mental Illness. Last year's Kentucky History Award went to Slavery and Freedom in the Bluegrass State, Revisiting My Old Kentucky Home, a collection of essays by Dr. Gerald Smith, a UK history professor. Eric Jackson, a history professor at Northern Kentucky University, won the Thomas Clark Medallion for his book, An Introduction to Black Studies. Jacinta Townsend's Mother Country was a finalist for the Mark Twain American Voice in Literature Award. Two Louisville writers published significant books in October. The Heartbreak Years, a memoir by Linda Honey, and Mama Said, stories by Kristen Gentry. In November, the University of Kentucky hosted Gurney Fest, a two-day celebration of the literature and legacy of 2019 Hall of Fame inductee Gurney Norman, who we hope is watching tonight's ceremony at home. Hi, Gurney. Also in November, the Paris-Bourbon County Public Library became the first sanctuary library in Kentucky. As a sanctuary library, its leadership is committed to protecting freedom of expression, which means no book banning. Historian Stuart Sanders published Anatomy of a Duel, Secession, Civil War, and the Evolution of Kentucky Violence. Short story writer Chris McGinley published his debut novel, an Appalachian crime thriller titled Once These Hills. Ron Davis, aka Up From Some Dirt, published his latest poetry book, The Second Stop is Jupiter. I think he's working with Ada. Christopher Rowe's novel, The Navigating Fox, was long listed in the best short fiction category by the British Science Fiction Association. 2023 Hall of Fame inductee Richard Taylor, who published 2 volumes of poetry last year, came out with a book of memoir and essays entitled Fathers. Former Kentucky poet laureate Frank X. Walker published a new poetry collection, Love House, and his children's book, A is for Appalachia, illustrated by Ron Davis, was the grand prize winner in the 2023 Black Authors Matter Children's Book Awards and was chosen by the Library of Congress as the youth title from Kentucky for the National Book Festival. Greg Pape, a former poet laureate of Montana who now lives in Frankfurt, published A Field of First Things. Appalachian poet Dorian Harrison published his first collection, Pretend the Ball is Named Jim Crow, poems based on the life of baseball power hitter Josh Gibson. Gwenda Bond's new novel is called The Frame Up. And last month, Lexington's Emmy Award-winning hip-hop artist Divine Karama published his book, Pages Full of Rhymes. 2017 Hall of Fame inductee Gail Jones published her third book in 3 years, Butter, 2 novellas and 10 stories. Her last 2 books, Palmaris and The Birdcatcher, were finalists for the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award, respectively. Shayla Lawson's new book, How to Live Free in a Dangerous World, a decolonial memoir, from Penguin Random House, has received a lot of national attention. Esquire magazine recently named it and Crystal Wilkinson's Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghost as 2 of the best 6 memoirs published so far this year. Lexington author Cynthia Ellingson's new book, The Lost Letters of Aisling, is currently an Amazon First Read selection for the historical fiction category. Linnell Edwards just published her new poetry collection, The Bearable Slant of Light. And earlier this month, Hopkinsville renamed the street for one of its most famous daughters, Gloria Jean Watkins, better known as the 28 2018 Hall of Fame inductee Bell Hooks, who died in 2021. She also was the subject of a new documentary, Becoming Bell Hooks, that premiered on Kentucky Educational Television. One of the Carnegie Center's major literary initiatives is the Kentucky Black Writers Collaborative. Here to give us an update on its growth and activities is the program coordinator, Claudia Lovemeyer.
Hello. Hello. That is an unsettlingly large photo of me. But we must carry on. In October of 2020, out of global protest in response to the murders of our own Breonna Taylor, as well as George Floyd, the Kentucky Black Writers Collaborative was born. To this end, the Carnegie Center flung open the red doors and offered Black Kentucky writers at every level language and writing classes at no cost to them. Why? To address systemic racism and economic, educational, and even publishing disparities. In addition, we provide scholarships for other Carnegie Center offerings, including mentoring, the Books in Progress Conference, Poetry Gauntlet, and the Author Academy. Our goal is to elevate, amplify, and celebrate Black voices. This is what we have done. Our scheduled programs include Black and Lit, where we featured the most accomplished and award-winning Kentucky authors, such as Crystal Wilkinson, Lisa Cross-Smith, Gerald Coleman, Amelia Zachary, Makalani Bandele, and Angela Jackson Brown. Our Burn the Mic monthly open mic series also continues. Bi-monthly, we feature guest poets that have included Shayla Lawson, Bernard Clay, Samar Johnson, Tina Andre, LaTanya Jones, and Katerina Stoikova. Burn the Mic has now expanded to remote locations, such as Pivot Brewery and the Likely Story bookstore. 3 times a year, we amplify the voices of KBWC members and a featured musician in our Say It Loud series, which is a partnership with WUKY Public Radio that has a listening audience of around 50,000. These are our 2022 to 2023 successes. We increased our membership by 50% and are now 160 members strong. We put 60 Black writers on stage. We commissioned 2 public art projects. We provided one-to-one mentoring for 8 writers, resulting in 4 published books. We gave away 28 Books in Progress scholarships and saw the highest amount of participation from the Black community since the Books in Progress conference began. We have hosted over 50 events in the last year, brought hundreds of people to the Carnegie Center, gave away 300 new books for the Black and Lit Book Club, and awarded over $14,000 in scholarships. And we are just getting started. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia Love. The Carnegie Center also sponsors the Lexington Youth Poet Laureate Program. Here to introduce Lexington's second Youth Poet Laureate is Jonathan Hall, the Carnegie Center's Youth and Outreach Director.
I am so honored to be on this stage with so many talented and creative minds that have inspired us over the many years. But it is with no less honor that I get to introduce you to a poet that I believe you'll be hearing from for many years to come. And no pressure. But to introduce Lexington's newest youth poet laureate. She is a senior from Lafayette High School in the Scapa Literary Arts program. She's a graduate of the Governor's School for the Arts for Creative Writing and has been writing poetry since she was in the 3rd grade. Her first poem came to her in the form of a dream. Please welcome Ms. Zoya Abbas.
Good evening. It's such an honor to be here and sharing the stage with so many talented writers, and thank you so much for letting me have a few minutes of your time. So the first poem I'm going to be reading is a persona poem that I wrote about my grandmother. So the first 2 lines that I'll be speaking are in Bengali. That's my hometown. That's the language I speak in my hometown. Baba High Court judge ছিলেন আমাদের পাটনা বাড়ি খুব সুন্দর ছিল I wish you could have seen it, Roshu. Our sprawling bungalow in Patna, filled with vines and wild mango trees and dogs, Judy the greyhound, Wendy the dachshund, Ma's pet deer before it became illegal to own one. She kept a garden in the back where she grew vegetables. Of course, she was never the one who cooked them. There was multiple secret passageways for a girl to get lost in. The rain in the monsoon seasons would pitter-patter against my windows, cause the humidity to frizz my hair. Oh, if only you'd seen it, Roshu. Baba commanded respect. His people loved him. He stood up for the low-wage workers, argued for the little guy. I know you'll do the same too. The house was full of music and light and colors. I wish you could have seen it, Roshu. I know you would have loved it. Thank you. And the next poem I'm going to be reading is a newer one, so it's my first time performing it. It's called 14, 15, and 16. The stepping stones of girlhood. The misunderstanding many come across, some days crawling into a box with no air holes would seem like the logical thing to do. Placing blame on hypocrisy means that I didn't learn my lesson. Was that what my death was, a teaching moment? Run me over and under and sideways I will lie, a breath a day, everything will go still, wait, breathless, before life comes crashing back full force. Was this what was meant of my death? The grand finale I've been awaiting for tens of millions of years? Was my death the teaching moment? But I never learned my lesson. I'm still here, aren't I? Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. That was beautiful. The Kentucky Literary Impact Award recognizes someone who has made great contributions to the state's literary culture, but not necessarily as a writer. The award was inaugurated in 2020, and this is only the 2nd time it's been presented. The first winner was Grace Ipes, the poet, printer, and publisher who founded Larkspur Press in Monterey, Kentucky. Our second recipient is the late Mike Mullins, former director of the Hindman Settlement School and the force behind Hindman's nationally acclaimed Appalachian Writers Workshop. Here to present the 2nd Kentucky Literary Impact Award is Silas House, the award-winning novelist and Kentucky's current poet laureate. Silas.
Michael Lee Mullins, a coal miner's son, was born June 22nd, 1948, and grew up in the Floyd County community of High Hat. He graduated from Berea College, where he developed a passion for Appalachian history and literature while studying under Loyal Jones, a Hall of Fame member. He earned a master's degree in American history from the University of Cincinnati. He joined Alice Lloyd College in 1972 and became director of one of the nation's first Appalachian Studies programs when he was only 24 years old. In the fall of 1977, he became director of Hindman Settlement School and changed its relevance in the region and the nation forever. Literary arts had always been important at Hindman Settlement, which opened in 1902. 2 Hall of Fame writers, Lucy Furman and James Steele, were longtime faculty members there, while another, Albert Stewart, grew up there and later started the Appalachian Writers Workshop. But Mike is the person who brought it to national prominence. Mike was insistent that it be a workshop where students and faculty members not only mixed and ate together, but also washed dishes together, creating a unique experience in the literary world, which can often be pretentious and exclusive. I remember clearly when one faculty member refused to wash dishes and Mike let them know that they would not be invited back, and they weren't. Mike read voraciously. He was always ahead of everyone else on what was happening in Appalachian literature. And each year, he carefully handpicked the best faculty for what has now become a workshop that is considered one of the best in the country. The Appalachian Writers Workshop is now seen as a rite of passage for anyone who is serious about writing in the region and has fostered the talent of hundreds. During Mike's 34 years of guidance, the workshop rose to such prominence that at one point almost as many who got in were turned away. People often say that there is something particularly powerful about Hindman Settlement School. Whatever that magic is, I believe Mike is responsible for first conjuring it. Mike also worked tirelessly to promote the work of his neighbor and friend, James Steele, leading to a renewal of interest in Mr. Steele's work in the last couple decades of his life. Mike often worked behind the scenes in writers' careers to help push them forward, to make connections for them, and best of all, to encourage more people to read their work. He was a tireless advocate for writers of the region, and the impact of his work cannot be overestimated. He certainly encouraged and sustained me as a writer and as a person. He is one of the reasons I became a published writer. He believed in me when only a handful of people did. In fact, he became a sort of surrogate father to me in a time when I needed him most. When he told me he was proud of me, I knew I was doing something right, because Mike Mullins did not sugarcoat or flatter. He only said what he meant. I think people loved him so much because he could appear so gruff, yet his tenderness always came through. As many times as I saw him bluntly tell someone exactly what he thought, there were many more times I saw him tear up when talking about his children, Cassie, Nathan, Brenda, his wife, Frida, his grandchildren, or the mountains he loved so much. He was hilarious, he was keenly intelligent, and he wore his Appalachianness proudly on his sleeve, refusing to change his accent or his attitude to fit a notion of what a nonprofit director should be. Mike was uncompromising, stubborn, and so incredibly hardworking that he made others around him want to work that hard too. When he loved you, you knew it. I don't think I ever missed him more than the day I was inducted as Poet Laureate, because I knew that if he could have, he would have been on the front row, beaming and telling people about how I stayed in a tent one year in Hindman because I couldn't afford room and board. He loved that story because he loved the idea of being devoted to your work, to go in the extra mile for what you believe in and love. That's what he always did, and that's why he will always be one of the people I admire most. When he passed away in February of 2012, the writing world lost more than the director of Hindman Settlement School and the Appalachian Writers Workshop. We lost someone who had worked so hard for us, someone who guided us with both bluster and vulnerability. We lost the shepherd of our flock. We lost our evangelist. We lost our beloved friend. But his legacy lives on at the Appalachian Writers Workshop. And there are many, many apostles of Mike Mullins who strive to carry his work forward. He's one of the people I always think of when I'm questioning if I'm doing the right thing or not. I will always be trying my best to make him proud of me. To accept this honor for Mike Mullins, I welcome up one of the handful of people that he adored most. Please welcome his daughter, Cassie Mullins Moses.
to say a few words?
On behalf of myself,
Is it?
no, it's with 3 lots on the tree.
Okay.
I'll come.
Okay, she'll come up. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for you.
Just pretend that I'm Frida. On behalf of myself, my children, and my grandchildren, thank you for honoring Mike in such a special way. I want to extend my gratitude to Silas House, the Hindman Settlement School, and the Carnegie Center for including the Mullins family tonight. If you knew my husband, you knew his passion for promoting the rich culture of Eastern Kentucky and the Appalachian region. Mike especially loved books, and this is true, and I'm the same way. You can ask my husband. Our house is covered. He took great pride in the Appalachian Writers Workshop and wanted nothing more than for each author to be successful. If he was here tonight, I have no doubt he would have worked the room thoroughly, made a few new connections, and probably raised some money for the Hindman Settlement School. Thank you for remembering Mike and his contribution to Kentucky and the Appalachian region. Thank you.
And now let's begin this year's Hall of Fame inductions. Since the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame was created in 2012, we've inducted 60 writers, 15 living and 45 deceased ones. Tonight we will add 3 living and 3 deceased writers. Inductees are chosen from public nominations by 2 committees of Kentucky writers and readers. A committee at the Carnegie Center compiles a list of candidates each year that is then ranked by a committee chosen by the Kentucky Arts Council. Based on those rankings, the Carnegie Center Committee then chooses the class of inductees. For living writers, this is a sort of lifetime achievement award. In choosing deceased inductees, we often look for writers whose fame may have passed, but whose work has stood the test of time. Tonight we will begin with our 3 deceased inductees. With each one, Jennifer Maddox or I will give a brief biography, then a prominent Kentucky writer will read an excerpt from that inductee's work. Jennifer.
Tonight's first inductee into the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame is the late Billy C. Clark. Billy C. Clark wrote memoir, fiction, and poetry about his life and the river culture along the Kentucky-West Virginia border where the Big Sandy flows into the Ohio. Clark was born December 19, 1928 in Catlettsburg. His family struggled financially, so around age 11, he struck out to make his own way in the world. Following a stint in the Army, he went to the University of Kentucky on the GI Bill. But after 3 years, he ran out of money and left school without a degree. Then he began writing. In the space of 4 years, Clark sold 5 books to New York publishers. The last of those was his most famous book, the memoir, A Long Road to Hoe, The Life of a Kentucky River Boy. Time magazine named it one of the best books of 1960, declaring that his work was as authentically American as Huckleberry Finn. Clark returned to UK in 1963 and finished his degree as a writer-in-residence. He spent many years teaching creative writing at Somerset Community College and 2 Virginia colleges, Longwood and Hampton Sydney. In all, 16 of Clark's books were published. He died in 2009 at the age of 80. Here to read some of Billy C. Clark's work is William E. Ellis, Professor Emeritus of History at Eastern Kentucky University. Dr. Ellis also is the author of many books, including A History of Education in Kentucky and a biography of the 2017 Hall of Fame inductee, Irvin Escott.
What an honor to read from Billy C. Clark's A Long Road to Hoe, The Life of a Kentucky River Boy. On the day I was born here in the valley, my mother crossed the Big Sandy River from Catlettsburg by streetcar to Huntington, West Virginia, which was 10 miles away. This was the farthest my mom had ever ventured from home. When she crossed the Big Sandy Bridge, she always closed her eyes, caught her breath, and prayed that the bridge wouldn't fall, at least not until she reached Kentucky soil again. For the bargain she found in Huntington, she was willing to take her chance with the bridge and the streetcar. So Mom traveled over to Huntington, looking for clothes that wouldn't be recognized near home. She had been inside a second-hand store when her first pains of labor came. Quickly gathering up the clothes she'd brought, she turned her eyes toward the Big Sandy. One thought occupied her mind. She must make it to Kentucky soil. Once she had reached the Kentucky side of the river, I could be born anywhere. The streetcar was rough riding, and the bumps in the road brought more pains. As Mom gritted her teeth and frowned and searched for the Big Sandy, the driver glanced over to her. "Something wrong, lady?" he asked as he stopped the streetcar to let a passenger off. "I'm going to have a baby," Mom said. "Hell's fire, lady!" The driver yelled. "Not here in the streetcar. Hold it, hold it." "How far till we cross the Big Sandy?" Mom asked. "Not far," the driver answered. "How far do you live from the bridge?" "Below the mouth of Catlett's Creek," Mom said. "Then, great God, hold off till we get there, lady." He slammed the door and pushed the streetcar as fast as he could, and the rest of the passengers on the car hollered and quarreled as the driver passed the stops, refusing to let them off. And now and then he looked over at Mom. "Hold it, lady. Hold it just a little while longer." The thought of risking her life bothered Mom, far less than the thought that if we did not make it across the Big Sandy, I would be born a foreigner. The river came into sight. The waters were swelling quickly now and rising over the banks. Mom didn't notice, and neither did the driver. Reaching the Kentucky side of the river, he hollered, "Where now, lady?" Sweat dripping from his face. "Just the other side of the creek," she said. And as she walked in the front door of our home, the water from the two rivers was rising onto the back porch. Dad ran from the house and brought back a doctor. Then Dad paced the floor while the doctor kept one eye on Mom and one eye on the rivers, already rising and coming in the back door. "It's 7 chances which will come first, the baby or the rivers," he said to Dad. And with a foot of water in the house, the bed where Mom lay, surrounded by the waters of the two rivers, I was born in the rivers of the valley. Thank you.
Our second inductee this evening is Mary Lee Settle. Mary Lee Settle was born in Charleston, West Virginia on July 29, 1918, and spent part of her childhood in Pineville, Kentucky. She wrote 23 books, including 15 novels. Her novel Blood Tide won the National Book Award for Fiction in 1978. 2 years later, she founded the annual Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction. Settle became widely known for the 5 historical novels that formed her Beulah Quintet. Published between 1956 and 1982, the novels spanned 4 centuries, from Cromwell's England to 1980s West Virginia. Settle taught at Bard College, the Iowa Writers Workshop, and the University of Virginia. She was admired for her meticulous research and realistic dialogue. Settle never stopped writing. She wrote and published 2 books in her 80s. She died in 2005 in Charlottesville, Virginia, at the age of 87, while working on an imagined biography of Thomas Jefferson. Here to read from Mary Lee Settle's work is Linda Blackford, columnist and opinions editor at the Lexington Herald-Leader. Linda grew up in Charlottesville and knew Mary Lee Settle.
Mary Lee came into my life when I was 10 years old, and she was larger than life in many ways, and I'm delighted that Better late than never. I'm reading from a memoir that she wrote about her grandmother, whose name was Addie Tompkins in West Virginia, but a lot of the book is about coal and coal mining, which her family was deeply involved in. You could tell a coal miner by his eyes, and it was still so when I was a child. They were darkened around the rims with coal dust that never came off, Nefertiti eyes. Men then lived hard, died early, carried guns, gambled, and being so on the tether of some decision made someplace else by men who didn't know their names, they swaggered even more. Those with brains fought their way downriver to college, but carried the scars of the coal business, and still do. The feudalism, the exploiting of earth and men, owner and worker, each far from the other, were threatened by the same diseases of danger and indifference, recognized each other as brothers who don't claim kin. We are all marked who have lived and been blooded by the coal fields. We never get away because it is deep in us, whether our fathers have worked the coal face or bought our clothes and our college educations with money that was as black as the rims of coal miners' eyes. We have all been formed long before human ancestry or our culture or kindness or hatred or lack of money has affected us. These are all personal, and they can twist and stunt or lie fallow in us or help us grow strong. But the coal mines, the darkness like the mark of Cain, are as deep within us as the eons that formed on both, slowly and inexorably, millions of years ago, where patient time has crushed and dried ancient seas, swamps, forests, animals, into something mysterious that seduced the world we lived in, made us rich, made us poor, broke the health of some of us, made some of us refugees. Like people who have been deserted by a lover, we may hate it, but we never forget it. Even if we have lived far from it, maybe we inherit a residue too, daily and unnoticed. The awareness of darkness, listening and not listening for accidents, for boom and bust, for failure, for wild success, all from the earth stabbing we are born into. Mining, the boring for oil, gas, minerals, unlike farming or the making of things, is the taking of something that only more eons can give back to us. It informs politics too. The ones who do the dangerous work produce paper profit for people without names or responsibility or care.
Our third inductee this evening is Paul Brett Johnson. Paul Brett Johnson was born May 19, 1947 in the Knott County community of Mounsey. His mother was a school librarian, and he loved looking at children's picture books as a boy. He also had a grandfather who loved to tell tall tales. Johnson moved to Lexington in 1965 to attend the University of Kentucky, and he never left. After nearly 2 decades as a commercially successful visual artist, Johnson launched a second career as an acclaimed author and illustrator of children's books. Johnson wrote and illustrated more than 20 books of his own. He illustrated many more books by other noted authors, including Hall of Fame writers James Still and George L. Lyon. Johnson won many national awards, including honors from the New York Public Library, School Library Journal, Smithsonian Magazine, and the Kentucky Association of School Librarians. He died in 2011. Joining us tonight is Paul's brother, John Johnson, and other members of his family. If you could please stand, we would like to recognize you. Here to read for Paul Brett Johnson is his good friend and artistic collaborator, the 2022 Hall of Fame inductee, George L. Lyon. She will read from Johnson's most famous book, The Cow Who Wouldn't Come Down.
I was so lucky to have Paul as a friend and to work with him on a book called A Traveling Cat. He even came over to the house to meet the cats that we had at the time. I read The Cow Who Wouldn't Come Down to my granddaughter over the weekend, and it was so interesting because, you know, the obvious question to me would be, how can the cow fly? But her question was, why won't she come down? Okay, the cow who wouldn't come down, to my mother and my father in memoriam. Miss Rosemary knew Gertrude had a mind of her own. Even so, the day that Gertrude took to flying, it put Miss Rosemary in something of a tizzy. This won't do, it just won't do, she fussed and stewed. There was no telling what people would say. Besides, Miss Rosemary hadn't the slightest notion of how to milk a flying cow. Miss Rosemary marched out into the yard. She called sternly, "Gertrude, you will kindly come down this instant. It's a known fact that cows don't fly." Gertrude cut figure eights in the sky, pretty as you please, and completely ignored Miss Rosemary. Miss Rosemary tried again. "Gertrude? Oh, Gertrude, it's time to come down now. Here's a fresh bale of sweet alfalfa. You love alfalfa." Gertrude took a nosedive, caught an updraft, and sailed into a lazy glide. She did not, however, come down. Poor Miss Rosemary. It was plain to see she was getting nowhere. She pulled her chin and knitted her brow. Somehow she must bring that silly, contrary cow down. Miss Rosemary hurried to the shed and sorted through her fishing gear. She chose a sturdy rod and returned to the yard. When Gertrude made an especially low swoop, Miss Rosemary drew back and let go. But the fishing line became tangled in some overhead branches. She missed Gertrude entirely. Gertrude perched in a tree and tried to sound like a bird. Murr, murr. "Oh, Gertrude, do hush," Miss Rosemary grumbled. "It's a known fact, cows don't murr. They moo." Miss Rosemary had another idea. She found a long rope, made a lasso, and climbed the attic stairs. She crouched by a window, breathless, and waited. Finally, Gertrude whizzed by, and Miss Rosemary hurled the lasso. All she captured was a noose full of air. "Gertrude, you are the limit," she fumed and stomped her feet. Miss Rosemary was not about to give up, however. She climbed very cautiously out the window and onto the roof. Inch by inch, she crawled upward. She planned to sit at the top and wait. Sooner or later, Gertrude would fly by again. Then she would grab hold of Gertrude's tail. Just as she neared the crest of the roof, Miss Rosemary felt herself slipping. She grabbed for the chimney, but missed it. Down, down, down she slid. When she hit the gutter, Miss Rosemary bounced. Her dress billowed like a parachute as she sailed through the air and landed in a mass of trumpet vine. "That crack-brained cow will put me in an early grave," Miss Rosemary moaned as she untangled herself. I love how the text doesn't mention that we're going to see her in duck-covered underpants. Miss Rosemary hobbled to the front porch and sat in her rocking chair. This was her best thinking place. She crossed her arms, set her jaw, and rocked. And thought. She rocked and thought without stopping for lunch. She rocked and thought without speaking to the postman. She rocked and thought without answering the phone. Gertrude, for her part, did not come down. Not once. That evening, when the sun turned red and the hills turned blue, Miss Rosemary finally had the answer. Wearing a crafty little grin, she rose from her chair and went to the barn. There she got a bucket of paint, a brush, and a large piece of plywood. She made a sign that said, "Help wanted, full-time cow." Experience desirable. I love that. Apply in person. Miss Rosemary put the sign on her front gate. She stole an upward glance at Gertrude, who pretended not to be curious. Then Miss Rosemary went to the attic. She dug around until she found 2 pairs of old roller skates. She took these to the sewing room. Next, she emptied all her boxes of fabric pieces and made a huge pile in the middle of the floor. She went through the mound and selected just the right scraps and squares. The rest, she decided, would do for stuffing. Miss Rosemary sat down and began to sew. She worked all through the night. Her sewing machine never stopped humming. Just as the sun cleared the hilltops, out of the house Miss Rosemary came, followed by Matilda. Miss Rosemary pulled Matilda to the barnyard, right up to Gertrude's feeding bin, which was right beside Gertrude's salt lick, which was right across from Gertrude's watering trough. Miss Rosemary took the bucket of paint and the brush, and she changed the sign on the front gate. She put a big X through the help wanted part. Then she added some new words. The sign now said, "No cows needed. Position filled." Miss Rosemary went back to Matilda and gave her a pat on the nose. "What a perfect cow," she said, a bit louder than necessary. With that, Miss Rosemary went inside, fixed herself a hearty plate of scrambled eggs and toast, and sat down to eat by the window. Gertrude circled above Matilda, slowly coming closer and closer. Around and around she flew until finally she made a sudden zoom for the clouds. Straight up she climbed, way up she climbed. Gertrude came down like a rocket. Thunk! She landed squarely on Matilda and mashed her flat. Miss Rosemary smiled and finished her eggs. Later, Gertrude returned to munching grass and swishing her tail, as cows are supposed to do. Miss Rosemary was relieved, but she couldn't help thinking it seemed that Gertrude was spending a lot of time around the farm machinery. "Silly me," Miss Rosemary clucked. "It's a known fact cows don't drive tractors."
And now for our 3 living inductees. The first this evening is the poet, novelist, and short story writer Marianne Taylor Hall, who nearly 50 years ago moved to Kentucky, where her family had deep roots and flourished as a writer. I should note that tonight marks the first time our first husband and wife who have been inducted into the Hall of Fame. Marianne's late husband, James Baker Hall, was inducted in 2014. Here to introduce Marianne Taylor Hall is the Kentucky novelist and short story writer Bobby M. Mason, who in 2016 became the Hall of Fame's second living inductee.
I am very proud to introduce Marianne Taylor Hall to the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame. She is one of the finest writers Kentucky has ever produced. Her best-known novel is Come and Go, Molly Snow, about a bluegrass fiddler who is grieving the loss of a child. The writer, Lee Smith, wrote that Come and Go, Molly Snow is not only one of the best novels ever written about music, it is one of the best novels ever written, period. It's a little masterpiece. And this quote from the New Yorker highlights what it is like to read Marianne's writing. One's interest is consistently held by the sheer wealth of feeling that the author's mellow prose sets flowing through the pages. Her short stories have been published in a variety of prestigious literary journals, such as the Sewanee Review, Plowshares, the Kenyon Review, and the Paris Review. Some of her best stories are collected in How She Knows What She Knows About Yo-Yos. The title story is both funny and frightening in a Flannery O'Connor sort of way. Marianne has been at the forefront of Central Kentucky's literary community for many years, and she has published locally with Saraban Press, the University Press of Kentucky, and the extraordinary letterpress Larkspur Press. And Old Cove Press, run by Nyoka Hawkins in Lexington, published her new and selected poems called Out of Nowhere, a stunning volume that encapsulates Marianne's delicate but tough-minded sensibility and leaves you reeling and rocking too. Who is this genius, this woman who is so deeply rooted in Kentucky, although she was not born here? Where did she come from? How did she come to be a Kentucky writer? Marianne grew up in Chicago and in Florida. She went to a women's college in Georgia, then transferred to the University of Florida, and later received an MA in dramatic literature from Columbia University. She even went to acting school in New York. Then she taught literature in any number of places. She has lived in Chicago, Florida, New York, Alabama, Ohio, England, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, as if she were a restless migratory bird looking for the right place to alight. Eventually, she chose to settle in Kentucky. Although her father, Edmund Taylor, was a Kentuckian, Marianne did not know Kentucky until she eventually settled here as an adult. Her mother, Mildred Rose Dubina, was an immigrant from Bohemia. Until she was about 9, Marianne lived in and among this large immigrant family in a small Bohemian neighborhood in Chicago. Her grandmother published a Bohemian newspaper. Marianne heard a lot of the old language in early years, and even now, she can sing a Bohemian song that her mother had sung to her. Her mother's voice is the energy in Marianne's story, Banana Boats, which appeared in the Paris Review and was chosen for Best American Short Stories, 1988. Although it is fiction, it evokes the atmosphere of that Bohemian neighborhood in Chicago and her later upbringing in Florida. And there may be more autobiography than not in this beautiful story that she says gave voice to her mother. Her mother did not have a high school education, but her father graduated from Transylvania in Lexington. Marianne speaks fondly of how the two found each other at Marshall Field's department store, where they were both working. He always valued her for her beauty, intelligence, creativity, and strength. He knew what he had found, Marianne said. Her mother may have lacked book learning, but Mildred Rose Dubina Taylor could bake pies like nobody's business. Marianne's earliest sensory memories were of her mother's cooking, and the textures of the household items brought back from the old country lodged deep in her memory and made their way into that story, Banana Boats. Marianne has said, My mother's story never was told in her lifetime, and that was a great pity. I feel that no one really knew her. She had a real creative sensibility, Marianne has said, but she didn't invite attention. She was too shy and self-effacing. She had artistic talent, and in middle age she took up painting. When people began to praise her work, she dropped it abruptly. It was as though Banana Boats was written to bring her mother to life. It is fiction, but in that story, the character is given the actual name of Marianne's mother. Mildred Rose's cooking was artistry. The breathtakingly complicated 10-layer pastry with the whipped cream filling bears thinking about. All of her cooking was intricate, complex, Marianne says. I imagine all of this expertise and the art of the everyday seeping into Marianne and forming her celebrated kindness and generosity and her incredible prose. Through her mother, we can imagine the source of Marianne's character, her writing talent, and the warmth of her hearth in her home in Kentucky, going back through Florida to Chicago to Bohemia. Her writing can't be separated from this history and this generosity of spirit. In recent years, Marianne traveled to that little town in Bohemia, west of Prague, and glimpsed her family's past. She discovered the buildings, the atmosphere, and a little of the history that her mother and her family left behind. Remarkably, she met people there who knew of her family, even though it had immigrated to the fabled land of America decades before, and they even recall that one of them was a novelist. I can't verify that detail, but it makes a pleasing, though not surprising, confirmation of Marianne's heritage. Leave it to a storyteller. Some Kentucky writers move away from the state, but then find themselves pulled back, and then they embrace it fervently. Marianne Taylor Hall, on the other hand, embraced Kentucky on arrival as an adult and never wanted to leave. She has often expressed her desire to stay home, and she made that home the best and most important place to be. She must have a garden. Significantly, it is through her home, her acre of ground, her house, her garden, that she receives the news of the world, the images and meditations that comprise her poetry. Her mind and heart are free to roam, free to receive. Although Marianne always lamented what she thought was an inability to transcend the daily demands of a household and devote more time to writing, unlike her husband, the late poet laureate James Baker Hall, whose guiding principle was put writing first, it is clear now that putting home and place first was an important and necessary foundation for Marianne's writing. Her writing pays tribute to the domestic world of her immigrant mother. Marianne Taylor Hall is our female Daniel Boone. She chose Kentucky too. She illustrates the power of the immigrant in our national life, and her writing embodies the strength and beauty of her mother, Mildred Rose Dubina Taylor, called Millie, of Bohemia. This is what I wrote about Marianne, explorer into the mystery of time, space, and consciousness. Who are we, and what is all this that comes out of nowhere? Beholding this mystery with sheer wonder, she zigzags between the out there and the right here. These poems form a breathtaking, exhilarating narrative, a journey through a particular life in the context of the infinite. She can touch base with the universe and then zoom in on a bird feather or a yellow leaf. We are jolted by her perceptions, surprised by what we hadn't noticed. But she was up at dawn, noticing everything in detail and bringing the fresh news to us. Out of nowhere is nothing less than genius. I am thrilled to welcome Marianne into the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame.
I'm speechless. I'm just so grateful for what you just said, and that you remembered my mother so well. I'm talking to you. Anyway, thank you very, very much, Bobby. I'll never forget that. Okay, I'm going to put on my glasses and quit crying. I hope someone recorded that. It was the best introduction I've ever heard. And to think it was for me. Thank you, Bobby, my dear friend. It is an honor to be here today. And you know, it seems to me that this particular gathering is very different from most of the gatherings that I've been at in the various years. We're all looking for ways to present our lives, and it's just so wonderful that we have groups who are glad to be friends with each other and say what they need to say to make the writing that people do better than the writing that people do. It's nice to have friends who tell the truth about it. Anyway, I hope that somebody recorded what Bobby Ann read. It is an honor to be here today, and I want to thank the many people of the Carnegie Center who have made the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame just as famous as the writers who have been inducted over these years. It is amazing to me how far we've come over these years. We are Kentucky writers here, and people from other places have heard of us. What I say to them is, come here and you'll see what Kentucky writers are all about. I don't remember when Jim, my husband Jim Hall, was inducted, or Wendell, or Bobby Ann, or Richard, or Frank, or the others. And I probably won't remember my own induction for long, but Larry can tell me about it, and someone is recording it, I'm sure. So it is not about me today, it's about you young writers out there. This is about you. It's your turn now. I am working on my next volume of poems and a long novel I've been pondering for years, and a screenplay for what was that novel a few years back. I'm working on a lot of things, but mostly I'm working on my gardens, getting them ready for spring. What I want to say to you, to anyone with the urge to put it down on paper, is this. It is important that you write. We are counting on you to keep writing. Keep writing, keep reading, keep telling the truth. Keep our story going strong. Be Kentucky writers, the best that you can be. I love you all. Thank you.
next inductee is the novelist, essayist, and nonfiction writer Fenton Johnson, who was born and raised in Nelson County. Here to introduce him is the award-winning poet and Transylvania University professor, Morris Manning.
You gotta like a guy who wears a dragonfly jacket. One of the great privileges of my life has been to count Fenton Johnson as a friend. I've learned many things from Fenton over the years, through his wide range of writing and through his wonderful conversation. Speaking of, it is rare to have a brief chit-chat with Fenton and to be done with things. But here's a secret. Many great writers are perhaps even better talkers. In the company of a good talker, the listener gets the chance to hear how the talker forms and guides his or her thoughts. Very often it's a slow process, one the talker seems to savor. Patience, reflection, pause, sometimes long stretches of pause. Such talks are never heated and only have curiosity as the itch that gets the whole thing going. Then, if the listener is lucky, he begins to realize that the talker, who will eventually sit down in solitude to practice as a writer, is finding perspective. You cannot start with it. You work your way to it. If I could pinpoint to a single word what I've cherished learning from Fenton Johnson, it's perspective. A writer is in no short supply for subject matter. Any topic will do. For Fenton, this is perfectly true. He has written about grief, the AIDS crisis, the parallels between Christianity and Buddhism, solitude, the geography of the human heart, as well as geography found on earth. For each writing endeavor, Fenton has had to find the proper perspective, and finding such perspective can be surprising, wonderfully so, and that sudden wonder, that new way of sight and insight, gets the writing going. Through my many conversations with Fenton, I have gathered that the notion of perspective must have arrived in his youth. He is the youngest of 8 children, raised in New Haven, a slow-going village in Nelson County, in the Knobs. It is a region rich in Kentucky and national history, but because it's in the Knobs, there are also geological and geographical history, which Fenton's perspective includes. He's not simply from a people, a community, he's also from a particular place on earth, which was defined by the hills and rivers well before the people showed up. In Fenton's youth, a handful of monks from nearby Gethsemane Monastery would on occasion traipse over the hill and hang out at the Johnson home until the wee hours, talking, which the monks could not do on the monastery grounds, and apparently drinking. As the youngest in the household, this certainly would have introduced Fenton to perspective. His mother, through sheer oomph, began the New Haven Public Library, independent of the Nelson County system at the time. To have a mother who was determined that people in the community should have access to books and information, history, wonder, nature, other civilizations, fiction, poetry, and truth, and on, must have furthered Fenton's calling for perspective. Then he gets to high school and is faced with the very real prospect that upon graduation he could be drafted to go to Vietnam, where boys from places like New Haven, Kentucky wound up in large numbers. For a young man who, based on his perspective, was doubtful of the Vietnam Project, there was probably no better place to attend college than Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. I expect
that was a jolt to Fenton's perspective, a freeing one and enriching one. A young man from New Haven, Kentucky, the youngest child from a devout Catholic family, a child cherished by revered monks, and a young man caught in the halting and uncertain knowledge that he was drawn to literature and also gay. From this background, but also himself, I expect that challenged his sense of perspective. But that's the wonderful thing about perspective that I have learned from Fenton. We cannot disconnect ourselves from our background, from the place and facts of our origins, nor can we deny the realities of our selfhood. We've got to take it all together because that's what it is, a togetherness. In our present age that's so attached to division, I'll take the wisdom of togetherness, which I've learned from Fenton Johnson's example as a human being and as a writer from Kentucky who is my friend and our friend.
I'm certain that this is, over many readings and many public appearances, the first one at which there was popcorn available. and that's what makes me really feel like I made it. I don't know what it says about Kentucky writers, but I have to say that I've received, a lot of times when you're introduced, people will say, so-and-so needs no introduction, and you're sort of cringing, And the two introductions that I have received that have been the most eloquent and the most moving and the most meaningful to me was, the first was by Nikki Finney at a benefit for the Kentucky Fairness Campaign that was at UK's Memorial Hall in 1991. And the second was the introduction that Morris just gave me. My oldest sister, who's in the audience, said to me one day, there's this poet who's moved into the neighborhood. Are you interested in meeting a poet? I'm always interested in meeting a poet. And that poet was Morris. It's a privilege to know Morris and Amanda and Lillian. And a word about that before I leave it behind, that Stanford connection, which I went to, the story of how I ended up at Stanford is too long and complex to relate here, but I only learned long after I was actually there that there was some sort of mysterious pipeline between Palo Alto and Kentucky, because who are all those people? Gurney Norman was there, Wendell was there, come on, help me, there were other people. Jim Hall was there. Ed McClanahan was it. Ed McClanahan was teaching a creative writing course in my freshman dorm, and everybody kept saying, "You gotta meet this guy from Kentucky," and I never met him during the time. It wasn't until years later. There was some sort of, and then the poet Greg Miller, who is from Hodgenville, was also a Stegner Fellow at Stanford. So there's a connection there. I like to open my public appearances and my classes, I do this as well, to ask those of you here to take a moment to think about someone whose love enabled you to be here tonight. So just take a second and think about somebody, bring them to mind. It's one way of filling the empty seats, because they're with us, of course. I noticed that Morris used this is the way Kentucky writers work. The phrase "a place on earth" is, of course, the title of one of Wendell's books, and the way in which our writing informs and permeates each other's writing is really a marvelous thing. I have too many thanks to give. It's a real honor to be counted among people in the Kentucky Writer Hall of Fame. Their work is all over my work. I've read most of them, if not all of them, so to be among them is humbling. I want first to thank Morris, of course. I also always start by thanking the people who died of AIDS and their caregivers, because the fact that I am standing in front of you today is because of them. Gay and lesbian rights were sort of making some forays into the public sphere, and then AIDS arrived. I was living in San Francisco at the time, and the witnessing of people who, in their selflessness and nobility, went into the rooms of people who were ill and dying at a time when we didn't know how the disease was spread. For all we knew, going and taking care of someone was a way of contracting the disease. Their activism moved the agenda forward to a place where I could have a writing career. The gay men, the lesbians and gay men of the generation prior to mine only published in the margins, and it was because of those people that I was able to have to publish in the national media. So I always like to call them to mind. My family, who, as I've said before, I don't think ever has told me not to write something, which is an enormous gift from one's family. The Carnegie Center, of course, Jennifer Maddox, Tom Evelyn, and Erica Cook, who have been so helpful. The Humanities Council, who chose my second novel, Scissors, Paper, Rock, as this year's Kentucky Reads. Bill Goodman, a man of impossible grace and enthusiasm for Kentucky letters. Kathleen Poole, his assistant. And this is my opportunity to say, if you're not a member of those organizations, I really encourage you to join, because they are a wealth of resources and information. University Press of Kentucky and Ashley Runyon, who could not be here tonight, but who republished the first two novels and published my third novel, The Man Who Loved Birds. And if you don't know about the series that Ashley has started of publishing marginalized Kentucky writers, I really encourage you to look into it. It's a really tremendous series in a service not only to Kentucky but to the nation and the world. And finally, teachers and librarians. As Morris said, my mother started a library in New Haven in an abandoned gas station with books from her own collection and books that the monks at the Abbey of Cassuni gave her. And that library in that abandoned gas station is now a library that any town would be proud of, building that any town would be proud of, because the people of Nelson County wisely chose to tax themselves in order to create this community resource. So I always have a shout out to librarians. Like every Kentucky writer of my acquaintance, I was born to a plate with overflowing material. Why look elsewhere? My father's family has been involved in making whiskey since whiskey was made in this state. On my mother's side, my grandfather, 4 generations back, was one of 3 brothers who crossed the Appalachians to settle in Nelson County in the 1780s. Over a lifetime of living hither and yon, I have guarded my Kentucky roots. I have set my nonfiction across the country and the world, but I set my fiction in Kentucky, and that tells you something. At least it tells me something. In 1977, when I moved from Washington, D.C., I was actually Ron Mazzoli's press secretary, to San Francisco to come out as a gay man. I understood, as did every LGBT person in those days, it's important to remember this, that I was closing the door behind me. I would never have a professional life. I would never be treated with respect. I would never teach, for at that very moment, California had placed on the ballot a 1977 version of Don't Say Gay, nearly identical to the legislation recently enacted by the Kentucky General Assembly over the governor's veto. In coming out, I was giving up all the dreams of my youth. And for what? The geography of the heart. And yet here I stand, evidence of unsung heroes and heroines who believed in the power of love and who insisted on talking about If you haven't seen George Wolfe's Rustin, do yourself a favor and stream it, because Bayard Rustin, aka Coleman Domingo, in a earth-shattering performance, makes my point with the power and force of drama. Given that those great souls saved my life, I had to do my best to measure up to the challenge of their fierce and abiding love. That, finally, is why I'm standing here, as a voice for those unacknowledged people who never had the opportunity to speak, who gave and continue to give their passion and labor and love so that the Commonwealth and the nation might live up to the promise it made to us and the world that all people are created equal. The seemingly permanent outsider status of the open-hearted people in Kentucky binds them together because love is a binding force. United we stand, divided we fall. And I thought about that when I wrote that. Isn't it interesting that the very flag has a motto that is about love? I wish someone would get that message to the legislature. Readers ask of all writers why we write. I wrote then and I write now to save my life. I write in hopes that some gay or lesbian or trans child, or their parents or friends or teachers, born in a holler or a small town or a suburb or a city, might find a lifeline in my words as I once found a lifeline in other writers' words. I write to be a voice to the voiceless. I think of the 23,000 U.S. colored troops from Kentucky alone, more than 450 from Nelson County, who offered their lives for freedom in the War of Emancipation, among them my first cousin 2 generations back. I think of Kentuckians for the Commonwealth who occupied the governor's office in defense of the mountains. I think of the mourners camped out in Louisville's Injustice Square, seeking justice for Breonna Taylor. I think of the teachers, parents, and students who rallied at the Capitol in opposition to Don't Say Gay, and in support of 3 of the most beautiful words in the English language: diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've told this last story only rarely before yesterday and today because it seems self-aggrandizing and because it was too private, but in this age of Don't Say Gay, the time has come to tell it in public. When I was touring with my 4th book, Keeping Faith, A Skeptic's Journey Among Christian and Buddhist Monks, I read at Joseph Beth here in Lexington. That night there was a good crowd. One man in particular stood out. Though there were empty seats, he stood in the back. He was tall, with a military bearing and a buzz cut. I took note. He hung around until all the other readers had left. Then he came to the signing table. In his hand was not Keeping Faith, but my second novel, Scissors, Paper, Rock, this year's Kentucky Reads selections. But he didn't hold it out to be signed. Instead, he said, "I'm the pastor of an evangelical church in Liberty, Casey County, county seat of Casey County, about 75 miles from here. I'm the pastor of an evangelical church in Liberty. I have a couple in my congregation who had a gay son who moved to Indianapolis," he said. "But then he developed AIDS and came home to die. As he was dying, their son gave them Scissors, Paper, Rock and said, 'If you want to understand my life, read this book.' And they read it, and they gave it to me. And I read it, and I drove up here to thank you for enabling me to understand his life." And then he turned and left, leaving me open-mouthed and stammering. The encounter had been too intimate to prolong, and there was nothing more to be said. The moment fulfilled itself in silence. It's obviously very moving for me to tell that story. One sings from one's suffering. At least that was true for me. And yet all of us suffer. It is our destiny and the nature of the human condition. So instead of running from that, instead of hiding from that, why not teach how love can transform suffering into compassion, At a certain age, say 70, one's thoughts turn organically toward home. In my case, the Knob Creek Hills come to mind. The hills I share with Abraham Lincoln is the landscape of my earliest memories. Dazzling lime green in spring, dusted with clouds of lavender, redbud, and pink and white dogwood. Wading the cool summer green waters of the Rolling Fork with my mother and father, setting trot lines in the evening sun and returning to run them at dawn. The slap of the channel cats against the walls of the galvanized bucket, their wine-red blood flowing across the great block of limestone where we killed and cleaned them, their blood running down the hole left in the stone by the removal of the brass pole to which once had been tethered the powerful draft horses who pulled loads of coal and grain from the train station to the distillery, whose boilers my father tended. The wintertime smell of cooking whiskey mash, making the nose run and the eyes water. The yeasty smell that permeated our drafty clapboard house, rented from Seagram's, and our clothes, speckled with coal dust raining down from the boiler smokestack. We smelled of sin and good times, not necessarily exclusive undertakings. Singing and dancing late into the night with Trappist monks for company on the patio my father and his sons built from 400 million-year-old limestone hewn from Knob Creek, riding in the back seat of the old fire-engine-red Ford Country Squire while my mother drove Thomas Merton to the Elizabethtown train station. They talked theology, while I stared out the window, excited to be going to some place with parallel parking. I see I'm indulging in nostalgia, but properly considered, nostalgia forms the warp of the cloth from which tradition weaves itself into being. From the memory of the way things were and the people who made them that way, we weave ourselves into a family and a community. And if memory is the warp, then what is the woof? From the writers and prophets in the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame, and from the great black prophet James Baldwin, this is the 100th anniversary of his birth in 1924, I've learned it is love. And that's also a line I stole from Wendell. I've learned it is love. We must love one another or die, Baldwin wrote. He meant that literally. If we need proof, all we have to do is look at the world we have created. The question, why do I write, begs its flip side. Why do we read? Baldwin wrote, you think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. Books taught me that the things that tormented me the most were the very things that connected me with all the people who were alive, who have ever been alive. I offer my last and most heartfelt thanks to you, lovers of books, the readers of the world. Your love breathes life into the past, bringing it alive in the present. It awakens us to the power and promise of our own history, not a fake history, tricked out in service to somebody's power grab, but an always changing, ever-evolving love of the here and now, a living past and a living present, all moments present to this moment. My love given flesh and blood through you, your love given flesh and blood through me. Thank you.
Our final inductee of the evening is the Tony Award-winning director and playwright George C. Wolfe, who was born and raised in Frankfurt. Here to introduce Mr. Wolfe is Jeremy Gillette, a playwright, actor, director, and assistant professor at the University of Kentucky's Department of Theater and Dance.
Thank you, Tom. Good evening. Oh, we can do a little better than that. Good evening. Good evening. There we go. It is an honor to be with all of you this evening to witness the induction of these outstanding writers into the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame. I honor all of you all. It is my distinct and humble privilege to present to all one of the inductees. And yet, where do I begin? Do I start with the 17 Broadway plays and musicals he has directed? Do I start with the 3 Tony Awards he has won or the 8 nominations he has received? Should I focus on the 6 films he's directed? Or maybe, just maybe, we should pause and highlight George C. Wolfe's gift for storytelling as a writer. Again, I ask, where do I begin? Should I start with his 4 Tony Award nominations as a writer? Should I start with his Drama Desk Award, his Obie Award, his appointment to the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities? Maybe we should begin with his induction into the American Theater Hall of Fame. Again, I ask, Kentucky, where do I begin? What if I started with, there was once a boy born September 23rd, 1954 in Frankfort, Kentucky. He attended Kentucky State University and later he earned his bachelor's degree from Pomona College. He continued his education at NYU, earning his MFA from NYU. And today, as we consider his tremendous body of artistic and creative work, which is a window into his soul, I am reminded that George C. Wolfe was a child that followed his dream. He grew into a man that was proud of his voice. He evolved into a person that never let the word no stop him from making a difference in the world. Today, I introduce to you someone whose resume you might already know, but today I declare to you, as a black man in America, it gives me no greater pleasure than to present to you a man who is a living, breathing walk of hope and inspiration to me and countless others. George followed his heart and by doing so created a body of work that enriches all of us. Without further ado, stand to your feet. Clap your hands and welcome to the podium, Mr. George C. Wolfe.
Well, that was awfully quick. You could have stayed up a little bit. In celebrating all that I have accomplished, I was at NYU, and I was working on 2 pieces. And I was working on one piece that was going to be the most successful thing that had ever been in existence since time began. And then I was writing something for myself. Cut to the thing that was going to transform the human condition. I remember standing on the corner of 96th and Broadway. A tornado happened to be passing through New York City on its opening night. And I was standing there reading my hateful, bad review while the wind was blowing and I was doing this because I could not stand still because the wind was so strong. And these people wrote hateful, mean, ugly, horrible, 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 horrible things about my book. 9 months later, I wrote a play called The Colored Museum. All of those people said, where has he been? He's this, he's this, he's that. I've been home with little voodoo dolls and trying to destroy all of you. That's what I've done. I have this incredible sense of defiance. I think in large part because I was born in Frankfort, Kentucky, and for the first 10 years of my life, it was segregated. And I've been back many times, and it's so fascinating to me. I go, what was so frightening about an 8-year-old skinny little boy that he couldn't go into this room, or he couldn't go to the Capitol Theater, or he couldn't sit at a lunch counter? And I think being imbued by a community that told me I was magical, confronting laws that told me I did not matter, created this dichotomy which made me go, fuck that. I will claim as much space as I need to claim. I will be in defiance as much as I need to be in defiance. And it's so, whatever I have become, I don't know what I've really become, but whatever I become, the genesis of that is the protection and the love and the honor and the support that I felt from my hometown. And there are many people sitting here, right there, Frankfurt is here, is here with me. And so, thank you for inducting me. I'm going to read from the play that I wrote for me. I'm going to read from the play that came from the most intimate, fragile, defiant, insane place inside of me, as my way of thank you. And I've done a bunch. I ran a theater. I've been directing, the place where I feel safest and most who I am is when I'm writing, and in large part because I have to stand completely still and not talk. And yeah, I know I talk a lot. And just receive information. Receive information of stories that were told to me when I was growing up, but also to receive information from forces that are with us all. Forces of survival and defiance and joy and light and love. And so this play that I wrote was called The Colored Museum. It's a series of exhibits. If you call them skits, I will attack. And it's the last one, and it's called The Party. And I don't think I can see a damn thing, but I will try to. Blaring music, Topsy Washington comes storming on stage. Yo, party, party, turn up the music, turn up the music. Have y'all ever been to a party where there was one fool in the middle of the room dancing harder and yelling louder than anybody else in the room? Well, honey, that fool was me. Yes, child, the name is Topsy Washington and I just love to party. As a matter of fact, when God made the world, on the seventh day, he didn't rest, no, he P-A-R-T-I-E-D, he partied. But let me tell you about this party I went to the other night, somewhere on between 125th Street and Infinity. Inside was the largest gathering of black, Negro, colored Americans you'd ever want to see. Over in one corner, you got Ned Turner sipping champagne out of Eartha Kitt's slipper. Over in love, you got Burt Williams and Malcolm X. We're discussing the shuffle ball change, existentialism as it relates to the shuffle ball change. And in the kitchen, Aunt Jemima and Angela Davis were just going off about Florida. Yay! When I wrote it, it was apartheid. I think it applies. And then Fats sat down and started to work. Them 88s. And then Stevie joined in. And then Miles and Duke and Ella and Jimmy and Charlie and Sly and Lightning and Count and Louie. And then everybody joined in. I tell you, all the children was up in that room, dancing to the rhythm of the beat, dancing to the rhythm of their own definition, celebrating in their cultural madness. And then the floor started to shake. And then the walls started to move. And before anybody knew what was happening, the entire room lifted up off the ground. The whole place just took off spinning and flying through the air, defying logic and limitations, just a spinning and a spinning and a spinning until it disappeared inside my head. That's right, girl. There's a party going on inside of here. That's why when I walk down the street, my hips just sashay all over the place because I'm dancing to the rhythm of the madness in me. And whereas I used to jump into a rage anytime anybody tried to deny who I was, now all I gotta do is give attitude quicker than light and then go on about the business of being me because I'm dancing to the music of the madness in me. And here all this time, I thought we gave up our drums, but no, we still got them. At least I know I got mine. They're here in my speech, my walk, my hair, my God, my style, my smile, and my eyes. And everything I need to get over in this world is inside here, connecting me to everybody and everything that's ever been. So honey, don't waste your time, and I've lost my place. So honey, don't waste your time trying to. There we are. So honey, don't waste your time trying to label or define me, because I'm not what I was. 10 years ago or 10 minutes ago, I'm all that, and then some. And whereas I can't live inside yesterday's pain, I can't live without it. The power is in my madness and my colored contradictions. Thank you for honoring me.
Stay for just a minute while some Carnegie staff members escort our inductees out to the lobby where they'll be there if you want to greet them, or I think some of them will be signing books. So before we leave though, I want to recognize somebody I saw coming in here to represent Governor Andy Beshear is Lindy Casabir, who's the Secretary of the Arts, Heritage, and Tourism Cabinet. Lindy, if you'll